First of all, I want to join other colleagues to take this opportunity to congratulate the USC, US-China Institute, and thank Clay for including me in the inaugural conference. These two papers in this panel are very rich and insightful, and interestingly, both have met very similar arguments about the regime stability in China and the non-democratic future of China's political reform. Let me start from Andy's paper, which is a comparative dictionary, as Harry Harding in last panel recommended. So it's very rich. I would only concentrate on his point on the China issue. He raised the puzzle of the high-level popular support of the authoritarian regime in China than in other Asian countries. And he used two sets of variables, perceived regime performance and political culture measured by the traditional political values and democratic values. In his research, through all those technical slides, he finds that the political culture seems is more powerful than the perceived regime performance to explain China's regime support. His research is very technical. I'm not doing survey research, so I don't want to make comments on his methodology, but I do want to make some comments on his arguments. First issue, when Nathan uses political culture as a variable to explain political behavior, including regime support, especially he talked about traditional political values are barrier to China's political reform. That brings me to the point that to compare with a lot of Chinese official positions and also Chinese so-called conservative intellectuals, they also argue that the Chinese political culture embodies an intolerance for conflict and a yearning for authority. In that case, Western democracy cannot be for China. And in fact, for example, a Chinese scholar, Pan Wei, he has a very controversial argument in my last edited book volume. He is considered now as one of the lieucons in Beijing's intellectual circle. He argues that China has not embraced democracy because democracy is not fit for China. He proposed a rule of law regime as an alternative to the democracy in China. Interestingly, his argument is also based upon cultural values. He used talking about China does not have the tradition for independent civil societies to check the Chinese government power. Chinese people have difficulty to identify with power politics and tend to place their hope in the justice of the government and admire social harmony. Therefore, the key democratic politics has no natural legitimacy in the Chinese tradition. In that context, I want to find, in that paper, I want to ask a question to Andy, that is, if he, in that case, accept these lieucons' views in China, or he wants to distinguish his view in that case from those so-called conservatives in China. The second comment is on Andy's dependent variable. The paper presents, I would say, somehow simple dichotomy of authoritarian versus democratic regimes, and found Chinese authoritarian regime enjoys a high popular support. But as the last panel discussed, China's authoritarian regime has also been evolving. Today's authoritarian regime is very different from the authoritarian regime 10 years ago, because arguably the regime is less authoritarian today than 10 years ago. And some scholars are even arguing that the current CCP regime has become more democratic and more accountable during the last decade, with the implication of various legal and political reforms. In fact, in the survey, I read the article, also when they asked questions about their support of the Chinese regime, many of their correspondents believe that their government in China is becoming democratic, or more democratic, and they are supporting an increasingly democratic government rather than an increasingly authoritarian government. In that case, how to make distinction between their support to the regime and the support to the regime types? In fact, this paper tries to make that distinction, but when I read it, I found some kind of overlapping there, somehow how to make clear distinction between the support to the regime types. The third comment is on the independent variable. Nation finds that, in fact, in his presentation, he said political culture is not very sufficient to explain the political behavior. But in the paper, when I read it, I got the impression that political culture is more important or more significant than perceived regime performance for regime legitimacy. The question here is, political culture is more or less constant and changes very slowly, but perceived regime legitimacy and also regime performance could change quickly and constantly. If political culture is more important for regime support, this support should be more or less stable over time, but that's not the case in China. For example, during Tiananmen Square, the support for the regime was very low than today. So in that case, in fact, both Chinese government and also Western observers think that. In that case, how do we imagine if political culture is important variable, the support for the regime has been changed so constantly? So that question should be considered. And so in that case, the argument in the conclusion argued, I think, makes more sense. That is, now Chinese government has paid great attention since Tiananmen Square to the economic performance, and also using nationalism that have enhanced the regime support. So the performance in that case, at least from intuitive perspective, seems more important than the political culture to explain the constant change of the support. Now I don't have much time left, so I just tend to add paper very quickly. This is a very insightful think piece and makes a provocative prediction about China's political future. I agree with him that none of us can be smart enough to imagine China's political future, but I'm very admiring him for making predictions anyway in his paper. Second, Ed claims that his argument is against the mainstream view and consensus among Chinese scholars. However, my question here is, I don't know to what extent the view that today's CCP governance is fragile is a mainstream view, and if there is a consensus that China's economic rise has set loose force of inevitable democratization. But I do see a mainstream view in this panel that is China's regime is stable and China will not come to democratic. And Ed argues that the CCP political system is to maintain political reform, is to maintain its one-party rule and establish a populist authoritarian regime. I agree with this argument. Political reform in China has aimed at making the single-party rule more efficient and providing it with a solid legal base. Many political reform measures have aimed toward that direction. But if China's political reform will go along the direction that the Chinese leadership wish to go for is not quite certain. So if that would not happen, how would Ed revise or change his argument. Finally, in the paper, I don't think he met that point in the presentation because he did not have time. Ed predicted that if the right populist authoritarian regime were to fall, it is most likely to be replaced by a ruling group that was more authoritarian. This indeed is a possibility, but it's a worst case scenario. So I want to ask Ed to see what is the best case scenario he would have. Because my time's up, I just stop here. Mm-hmm.